The January 18th, 2022 Rule Development Workshop is now in session. Tammy, roll call, please.
Mrs. Belford?
Present.
Mrs. Campbell?
Present.
Mrs. Jenkins? Ms. McDougall?
Present.
Mr. Susan?
Present.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we held a policies work session for the policies listed on today's agenda on December 14th, 2021. Today will be the public's first opportunity to publicly address these policies. Is there anyone here to address policy 5517, anti-harassment? Is there anyone here to address policy 5517, anti-harassment? Is there anyone here to address policy 5517.01, bullying and/or harassment? Is there anyone here to address policy 5517.01, bullying and/or harassment? Is there anyone here to address policy 5517.03, dating, violence, and abuse? Is there anyone here to address policy 5517.03, dating, violence, and abuse? Is there anyone here to address policy 2260, non-discrimination and access to equal education opportunity? Marsky, if you'd like to approach.
Hi, I just want to make sure that this particular policy is addressing and in line with our state laws. Thank you.
Thank you. I think at the end, when there's any board member comments.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, is there anyone here to address policy 2260.01? I'm sorry, is there anyone else to address policy 2260, non-discrimination and access to equal educational opportunity? Is there anyone here to address policy 2260.01, anti-harassment and non-discrimination appeal procedures? Is there anyone here to address policy 2260.01, anti-harassment and non-discrimination appeal procedures? Is there anyone here to address policy 2266, non-discrimination on the basis of sex?
Thank you. I just want to be sure that the board is staying with, in line with state law, because the phrase including sexual orientation and or gender identity opens the door to participation in girls' sports, locker room use, and restroom use, as well as other activities by biological males. So yeah. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. Is there anyone else here to address policy 2266, non-discrimination on the basis of sex?
What I want to address, and I realize this isn't a question and answer session, is how this particular policy would again align with state law with, I believe our legislation passed a law on this in March of 2021. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else to address policy 2266, non-discrimination on the basis of sex? Is there anyone here to address policy 2410, school health services? Is there anyone here to address policy 2410, school health services, special services? Is there anyone here to address policy 2431.03, concussion and head injuries? Is there anyone here to address policy 2431.03, concussion and head injuries? Is there anyone here to address policy 2800, educational services for students in Department of Juvenile Justice education programs? Is there anyone here to address policy 2800, educational services for students in Department of Juvenile Justice education programs? Is there anyone here to address policy 3121, conditions for employment and reemployment of staff? there anyone here to address policy 3121, conditions for employment and reemployment of staff? Is there anyone here to address policy 3121.01, criminal background and employment history checks? Is there anyone here to address policy 3121.01, criminal background and employment history checks? Is there anyone here to address policy 3215, smoking and tobacco-free environment? Is there anyone here to address policy 3215, smoking and tobacco-free environment? Is there anyone here to address policy 3590, personnel file? Is there anyone here to address policy 3590, personnel file? Is there anyone here to address policy 5500, student conduct? Is there anyone here to address policy 5500, student conduct? Is there anyone here to address policy 5610.05, participation in extracurricular activities? Is there anyone here to address policy 5610.05, participation in extracurricular activities? Is there anyone here to address policy 5780, student rights, parents' rights? Ms. Mursky, approach, please.
I would also like to
5780.
address the previous policy, board policy 56101, participation extracurricular activities. Again, just making sure it
Hold on
aligns with our
just
state
one
law.
second for me, Ms. Mursky. Mr. Gibbs, is that, we moved past that policy already?
I would allow it.
Okay, go ahead.
Just making sure that our school board policy, as far as the district goes, aligns with our state policy for that, our state law. And then students' rights, parents' rights, again, same concerns, is making sure that our policy as a school district reflects the parental bill of rights as far as the Florida state law goes. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else to address policy 5780, student rights, parent rights? Is there anyone here to address policy 8330, student records? Is there anyone here to address policy 8330, student records? Is there anyone here to address policy 8405, school safety and security? Is there anyone here to address policy 8405, school safety and security? Is there anyone here to address policy 840, safe school officers? Is there anyone here to address policy 8407, safe school officers? Is there anyone here to address policy 8452, automated external defibrillators, AED? Is there anyone here to address policy 8452, automated external defibrillators, AED? All right. That's going to conclude the hearing portion of our policy discussion today. Board members, is there any need for discussion on any of the policies that came forward?
I talked to Ms. Londano before the workshop today, but I had asked if we could, because we had a lot of policies this time, and it was, if we could, moving forward, do like we have done in the past and have any changes made in the red line copy from work session to workshop be maybe highlighted in yellow. That way we can see what changes were made from meeting to meeting. I think we did that with something last fall, so that it was maybe highlighted in yellow. That way we could tell without having to go all the way back through what changes were made since last time. That would be really helpful. And I think I'd asked Ms. Londano if she would be prepared for the policies that she's has worked on to share those specific changes that were made. I think it was the things that we asked for, but if you wouldn't mind just sharing the ones that you had already made adjustments to, specifically the one about required and recommended or encouraged.
Yes. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm only going to speak to the following 6 policies that are all in some way related to policy 2266, which is the new policy on Title IX to comply with the new federal regulations specific to sexual harassment investigation procedures. So starting with policy 2266 from our last meeting, there were just 2 very minor changes that were implemented in this section F3, F as in Frank. It was changed just to bring it into alignment with section H2. If you might recall, this was the one that indicated Dr. Mullins as superintendent would the way that Neola drafted the template, it kind of implied that he would personally resolve any sexual harassment investigation against the Title IX coordinator, who's currently myself. And we just opened that language to say that he could designate it to another individual who's trained. So that's F3. And then in F2 is where we made the change for student reporting instead of required, which was the Neola template. We had the option to change that to encouraged, and we did in F2. Those are the only changes made to policy 2266. And then in this other cluster of policies, policy 2260, there was one change since our last session, and that was in section 4A, and same change of students to encouraged. And it just kind of breaks apart. Let me see, I have it flagged here in the clean copy. So under section 4, it's split it into subsection A and B to make it even for greater clarity. So the board requires its employees to promptly report these incidents, but all other members of the school district community, including students, are encouraged. And that was it. The other policies that are somewhat related and a domino effect to these were 5517.03, 5517.01, and 5517, and there were no changes made to those policies.
Just for clarity, we had some questions about our the compliance of this policy with state law. Can you kind of give us, because I've had several, you guys I think have received some of the same emails I have. We had some community concern as to why we're making all these changes. So can you kind of just give a brief summary of what the impetus was for the changes?
Yes, as we just discussed this earlier this afternoon. So the impetus for these changes, these policy numbers I just listed, was initiated because of the changes to the federal regulations on Title IX, which is only the discrimination piece that addresses sexual discrimination based on sex or gender. And specifically, the 2020 regulations address the investigation process for sexual harassment cases. So Title IX encompasses a lot of things, including athletics and some other issues, but the piece that the policy 2266 really zeroes in on is sexual harassment cases. So sexual assault on campus, I mean, those are fortunately very rare here in Brevard, but when that does occur, there's an allegation that that occurs. The changes to the federal law have just spelled out for you specifically a really detailed series of steps that must be taken. And so that is what policy 2266 is. When those changes came to me to kind of take the lead on those revisions, what I just personally did on my own initiative was I looked around at what other policies might also be affected that needed to do some cross-referencing to the new 2266 process, because 2266, the sexual harassment investigation procedures, because that's prescribed by federal law, under the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution, that trumps any other state law provision. So just so the viewing public knows, there is good alignment between state law and federal law on this topic in terms of they have a very similar ban on discrimination on the basis of sex or gender. The Florida statute you can look at is section 1000.05. This is the Florida Educational Equity Act. It says that discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, gender, disability, religion, or marital status against a student or an employee in the state system of public K-20 education is prohibited. It's very similar to federal law, but what happens is the process we have to use the federal process when there's an alleged incident of sexual harassment. So I'm not sure, did I quite address what you were?
Yes, that's just mainly wanted to get around to why this process was started. And I think I've explained to the people who have talked to me about how Neola goes about their process. If there's a change in Florida law, a change in federal law, then they say, here are your policies that you need to update, and they give the suggested language, which we can tweak in some ways, but we can't tweak things that would make our policy then against law. So then, is there anything in what we are updating today that would specifically go against, I believe, the law that was asked specifically, and I've been asked a few times about it myself, against the Fairness in Women's Sports Act?
Now, I'm not prepared to, I haven't studied that act in depth and compared it specifically to these policies. What I can tell you is the Neola attorneys, They're studying federal law, state law, local laws, everything that affects K-12 schools, and they will not give us a policy that's contravening any of those laws. To the extent there's a conflict between federal and state law, federal law trumps. That's the supremacy clause, the Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, demands that. But I don't know that I'm prepared to speak directly to that because I don't know the ins and outs of that. I know Title IX very, very well. I'd be happy to look at it further. I don't have any cause for concern to believe that's the case.
Yeah, the only concern on that is actually not what people would think. The concern that we have is that the law that was passed is only about women, transgender females not participating in male sports and not transgender males participating in female sports. That then becomes a Title IX issue because we're treating two different people differently. And so that's why we've maintained basically what FHSAA has put down as their guideline. So it has the 5610.05 is really putting everybody on notice that you may lose your eligibility if you misbehave. It doesn't have anything to do really with eligibility otherwise, but we follow the FHSAA eligibility standards, which follows the state law. We have to follow it a little bit wider so that we don't get caught up into a Title IX issue. And Valerie or Paul could probably speak better to that, but I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we're actually doing that evenly, so we're not allowing transgender
Males,
males to participate on male sports teams.
female teams. Transgender males to participate on male teams and transgender females to participate on female teams. You are correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Paul, did I mess up anything? You're really good about getting me straight if I get it wrong.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it, Ms. Campbell? If you think of something else, let me know. I'll come back to you. Ms. McDougall.
Well, pretty much, Ms. Campbell already asked the similar questions, because I had the same questions from constituents about, are we following the Florida laws and our state laws, and do any of these policies conflict? And I'm hearing that we are well within state laws, and when all comes else, it's the federal laws that trump state laws. But it sounds like that we are all in alignment at this point.
Again, my current area of expertise, the deep dive I have is Title IX. I would point for some additional clarity on, I recall there was a comment about gender identity and specifically that being inclusive in the Title IX piece, Title IX language. I can tell you where that's coming from if that's helpful. The Department of Education, Federal Department of Education, if you want to read in the Federal Register that was issued on Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021, Volume 86, number 117, that's where you can read all about the Department of Education's decision to apply the Supreme Court's reasoning in the Bostock case and that determination. It was a Title VII case, but the Department of Education has decided to apply that reasoning to Title IX for all the various reasons they detail in that Federal Register. So it's maybe a helpful piece of guidance as to where the federal government is standing on their application, their interpretation of Title IX. So that's where some of that language is coming from, and it's reflected in our NEOLA policies.
Ms. Londano, could you send us a link to that Federal Registry
Yeah.
reference so that we have that handy to share with constituents?
Yeah,
Please,
I'd be
ma'am.
happy to.
And Mr. Susan, I didn't mean to skip over you there. You were kind of hidden. Did you have comment there?
Yeah, I was just going to ask a couple questions, if that's okay, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
So what I'm hearing you say is, so when I read this, it's 87 pages long, and it gets into some really graphic stuff, right? So I think that the intent behind this was not what is being talked about here, right? I agree with you on that. But although it does, and so one of the issues that I have is there's so many different rules with the different activities. For instance, FHSAA has an entire list of guidelines on how a person can play the sport, right? Along with every other activity that we have. So whether it's these national competitions and all that stuff, being the fact that this is one of those type things, I would recommend that before we bring this forward as a final vote, which, we can do it, that we make sure that what we're saying here does not impact any of that. So meaning that if we are accepting that the individual can automatically become, like we're saying, yes, anybody can play and be admitted, right? But then under guidelines of other activities that we have, like the FHSAA and stuff like that, may not let them do it, then we need to make sure that that's inside of this. Does that make sense to you? Because, go ahead.
I just want to make sure I understand.
Sorry. Something's under here.
We have a policy about athletic buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So can we education toward that policy so that we can?
Yeah, I just, like, it's a blanket, right? Like, so we all know that if I'm going to go play sports right now, I'm going to have to go through FHSAA's guidelines. We know that. But there's like a ton of other activities and things that we do that have their own guidelines, right? So we're referencing FHSAA for the sports, but there's all kinds of other places like Odyssey of the Mind. What are their rules and regulations? What, you know what I mean? Like, just making sure that we're okay on that. Or we reference inside of there that per each activity's guidelines. Does that make sense? So we have Title IX saying that this is okay to do. State, which is arguable, but then you have each one of the other entities that have their own guidelines, like the FHSAA. So we may not have to reference exactly to the FHSAA, but actually reference that each activity, you know, per the activity's guidelines of participation that we've agreed to, may be the final defining factor. Does that make sense to you? If FHSAA has the ability to say no to an individual that we say yes, then we are in conflict with the FHSAA and our guidelines may be in conflict. That's all. Just trying to make sure that that's clear. Because they have a real stringent process through this.
So, well, let me say this, as to policy 2266, that's the one for me that I'd like to zero in on for a minute. This is, to me, there's a real urgency of the district coming up to speed with the federal regulations. I'm purely talking about the piece of the Title IX pie that has to do with sexual harassment grievance process. So let me direct you to some language in 2266. Tell me if you think this alleviates. To me, in my mind, there's absolutely no connection to 2266 with athletics issues of Title IX. As Title IX is like an umbrella, so there are a number of things under it, including athletics. But in my mind, nothing we're talking about today has a lick to do with athletics. That's a worthy conversation separately, but 2266, let me read under B. So there's 2266A, Title IX policy, 2266B, Title IX coverage. This Title IX policy applies only to sexual harassment that occurs within the scope of the district's education programs and activities that's committed in the United States by a member of the school district community or a third party. So that's the limiting language right there of the scope. I realize it's a big, long policy and it references Title IX a lot. I realize Title IX means a lot of different things. There is a Title IX bounce to athletics. Like I said, that to me is a separate conversation for a separate day, perhaps. But for 2266, I would love to still see this go forward because the schools desperately need this guidance so that we make sure we're following the appropriate steps legally under our sexual harassment cases. So that's just the piece I wanted to say. Chris or Paul, I don't know if you want to speak to the athletics piece. That might have a bounce in some of the other policies, but not 2266.
If you read in the introduction, it says the requirement not to discriminate in its education program or activity extends to admission and employment. So when we're talking about that, that's where I have it. And it may be that everything's fine. Like I'm not saying halt the process. I'm not saying all of that. I'm just saying in the opportunity between now and when it comes forward for the final vote, we make sure that a couple of things checked out. That's all. And this was one of them, just to make sure that there's no tie back to admitting somebody over the rules and regulations of other entities like the FHSAA and stuff like that. And the state law, you know what I mean? We have to make sure. I love this statute, everything else except for that implementation clause that's in the beginning in the introduction, getting everything squared up as far as sexual discrimination and everything else. But I would like to make sure that moving forward, I understand that we have to make sure that our federal laws are in line and everything else, but I also want to make sure that we don't pass a policy that is then violating other things. That's all. So I'm not saying stop, hold, whatever. I'm just saying in the process of the next, I think it said February 8th is the next time we're bringing it forward, just to make sure some of this stuff gets taken care of. That's all. Does that make
Thank you.
sense?
February 8th is the final approval vote, so I believe any changes made after today would restart the whole process. We'd have to
Sure.
re-advertise.
But I'm
So,
not going to pass a law that it
Sure.
goes in violation of something else, so let's just verify it before
yeah.
it gets there. That's all.
Well, I don't believe Neola would give us anything like that. And like I said, to me, I have no cause for concern. Paul, do you want to, think we can look back at this? And then are you proposing, Mr. Susan, then, I mean, if Paul or I felt there was a concern, then we would table the whole thing and
I would say if it violates any of our activities, rules and regulations, that we either eliminate that rule or activity, or we write it in that, like you said, there's a subscript that says, according to the rules and regulations of each one of the activities, guidelines, and rules, the acceptance to these activities may vary. That's all. Just so that we're not coming into conflict with the FHSAA's rules and guidelines. And look, like Neola has templates, like they do it all the time. Throughout the last 6 years that I've been on the board, we've seen stuff come down that we could do a better job and look at, that's all. And I'm not saying stop it, but I am saying that if, in the event that it does, that we may need to stop it just to make sure it's right, that's all. That's the same with anything.
I want to make sure that I'm fully understanding. All of our activities that we approve in this district, whether it's through student services or through leading and learning or any other division, have to follow all of our policies. So by putting this in policy, we are saying you must follow this. I don't know if what you're looking for is better procedures in reviewing those. I'm
No.
not sure I'm understanding you.
Right now, if the FHSAA, if I'm an individual and I apply to the FHSAA, they have guidelines, right?
Correct.
Okay, so if we're saying right off the bat, everybody gets accepted based on no rules or whatever it is, and FHSAA turns around and says, we are not accepting this person for activities, that's what I'm trying to avoid. That's
So
all.
I think if I could intervene for just a second and maybe try to do some interpretation between the two perceptions. Mr. Susan, I don't think when this policy says extends to admission, enrollment, and employment, they're not talking about admission to athletic participation. They're talking about admission to schools, enrollment in schools, and employment in the schools. So I think that's what Ms. Landana was trying to explain, is this policy is not addressing athletic participation.
It just says not discriminate in its education policy or activity, or program or activity, meaning activities were inside of there, that's all. Look, I'm not saying just put the brakes on it, I'm just saying what I'm asking, make sure it doesn't violate it and move forward, that's all. It's a check and balance,
Yeah.
and I
I
can
think-
sit with you and we can go through it.
I think he just wants to make sure that there are no separate rules out there that this policy would be in conflict with.
That's it. And
So I don't know if there's any out there, like FHSA has their own set of guidelines. He doesn't know if Odyssey of the Mind
no, I'm
has
not
its
saying
own
Odyssey of Mind,
separate-
please.
I'm just
threw them
saying,
out there.
I'm just saying that's as an example. If they had their own set of guidelines for participation in the Odyssey of the Mind program, that those guidelines don't conflict with anything in our policy.
We might have ROTC competitions, I don't know, you know what I mean? That's all.
Not that there are, he's just asking for us to check. And
Okay.
if there are, then we have a
That's
separate
it.
issue.
That's all,
Okay.
that's all.
I think we're good for now.
And then if there's, are there other counties that have passed this? I'm assuming that if the Neola template is down, this is consistent with other counties that have passed it. So we're not like running rogue so that the
Right.
public knows. We're not coming up with this Neola template like other counties have come up with this. And as long as it doesn't conflict with any of those, I'm okay.
No,
I'm just
that-
saying between now and then, and I can work with you on it.
Yeah, just to assure you, this language, in that introductory language is will not discriminate in the education program or activity. That is federal law. I definitely can't advise that we stray from that. If we have an OCR complaint or they come in, the first thing they're gonna look for is what's your policy? What does it say? Is it covering appropriately? And that just is what it is. I mean, I can't rewrite the federal law on the scope of it. So, and the word admission, that's a good catch. The law was kind of designed for college, and so there's a lot of focus on admission. We don't really have that dynamic here in K-12, but that's why that word says that. It's not indicating anything about athletics.
Then if it's any local or state or federal activity that we participate in should be following federal laws through the Title IX, and there should be no problem. And all I'm saying
Right.
is, let's just check it to make sure. as
Sure,
we go
yeah,
through.
we'll be glad to double check.
Are we doing like just this one and then wait till anybody else? I just got two more that I was gonna mention, but I was gonna wait until we hit them. Are we good on that? Paul, I can get with you on it. Is that cool?
Yeah, I wasn't planning on going through individually, Mr. Susan, because there's
Okay,
so
I
many of
figured.
them, so if you want to go
figured.
ahead and touch on the
Easy.
ones you want.
I got called, so 5610.05, just, and this is just more of a point. We have rules and regulations inside of our county that other counties do not, right? And one of them is this transfer rule drives our sports crazy. Now, whether we feel good about it or not is not the argument. Right now, when we go to play other teams in state playoffs, right? And we're playing and running up the chain and Coco's playing whoever, there are other teams that are able to get their transfers on their campuses before we can in playing athletics. For instance, right now, our transfer rule says that you have to wait until the end of that year, unless you move into the district, to transfer and start playing sports. But in other counties, you're allowed to transfer and start playing as long as you're admitted into the school. Now, the reason for that is because if you get a kid to transfer at the end of the football season, you can work them into your training for the spring season and have them ready for the fall season for sports. That's every sport, soccer, all of them. Playing together as a team is something that's needed big time. So when we go out and we're competing against other counties, one of the things that we run into, and this is, I'm not trying to stop this, I just want to bring this as a point because it's part of the conversation. We have limiting components to our athletics that makes our kids compete at a different level. And some of them are just opinionated arguments. I would make a very strong argument that we should allow individuals who transfer to automatically start playing the sports. There's no issue behind it. Now, you could put in a transfer rule that says you can't transfer back and all that other stuff, but there are limiting, and this is one of them. So just wanted to bring it up. I don't have a problem moving forward with it. I just want everybody to start knowing that I probably will start trying to pound away at some of these throughout the next 6 months. So.
I'm wondering if that, because when we talk about transfer, unless you're moving,
Right.
into that district, the only time we allow transfers is during open enrollment, which would be, I don't think we're allowing ELOs in the middle of the year. So if someone finished a football season at one high school and said, well, now I want to transfer to another school that's not my own school, so I can start spring practice in their school, you can't ELO in the middle of the school year.
There's a lot of limiting.
So there's more than just athletics when you're talking about that.
Absolutely,
We would have to
absolutely.
change our whole open enrollment process.
Absolutely, it goes back to some of those, but we have other counties, just so you know, this isn't like some kind of voodoo. This is other counties that allow this to happen. And it just stinks when we go to play a team and they have opportunities that our children aren't. And I know the transfer rule is kind of a debate back and forth, but when we go against a team that is playing together, whether that's, basketball, football, whatever it is, they've had longer to play together. And that puts us at a hindrance, that's all. And if all it is some rule that says that we can't, and we can't get over that, I think that's something we can do. And there's a couple other ones. So I'll work with staff on it, but I just wanted to bring it up as a point.
So, Mr. Susan, just for point of clarification, this policy, which would have to be changed today if we were going to make any changes because of the policy revision process, has the provision that says unless the student meets the criteria in policy 2431.01. So I think that's probably where the focus needs to be. So we're fine moving forward with
And I
this,
don't even
right?
know if you guys would, absolutely. This is fine moving forward, as I said. And I don't even know if this board would support some of the things that I would bring forward. But the issue is that I just wanted to put it on your radar because it's on our topics.
Okay.
And then the only other thing that I was going to ask is, do we have a Neola template for school renamings? Because we talked about moving into that. If there's a way to get us a copy of what Neola says a school renaming would be, that could help us with what we were trying to do, since we're on all these darn topics. That's all. Okay?
Any additional board member comments on any of the policies before us today? Any questions from staff on guidance? Ms. Londano, you're good with questions and where we're going? And Mr. Gibbs, you're good? Ms. Campbell?
I was looking through yesterday, and there were a couple of, there were just little typo technical things in 5517 that I don't think got fixed yet. And I have the locations.
Yeah, if they're just technical, Neola can do that. You can email me. I mean, if it's not substantive, we can.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
It's
we
just
can.
the words were misspelled and they needed a comma and.
Yeah,
something to be
sometimes
turned around.
that happens when it converts from PDF to Word. It's a very clunky process. So yeah, please email those to me. I'll be sure to fix them.
I will.
Anything else? All right, then that will conclude the rule development workshop. Hearing nothing further, this meeting is now adjourned.
Unbelievable.